This is Pushing Boundaries, a podcast about pioneering research, breakthrough discoveries, and unconventional ideas. I'm your host, Dr. Thomas R. Verney. My guest today is Dr. Michael Levin. Do you like to be called Michael or Mike?
Mike is fine.
Mike is fine. Dr. Mike Levin is an American developmental and synthetic biologist at Tufts University, where he is Vannevar Bush Distinguished Professor. Levin is director of the Allen Discovery Center at Tufts University and of the Tufts Center for Regenerative and Developmental Biology. He's also co-director of the Institute for Computationally Designed Organisms with Joshua Bongard. He's the founding associate editor of Collective Intelligence. And in his spare time, of which I don't think he has too much, he co-edits the Bioelectricity Journal. Dr. Levin has published more than 350 papers. The full list can be found on his Google Scholar page or in his official biography at Tufts website. Welcome, Mike Levin.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, you were born in Moscow, I believe.
Yep.
In 1969, and you came to the USA, what, about the age of 9?
Yep, correct.
Your father was a computer programmer and worked for the Soviet Weather Service, and your mother was a concert pianist.
Yep, true.
Are your parents still alive?
My dad is, yeah. He's downstairs. He lives here with me.
Yeah.
And he still teaches 3 courses a semester at the local computer science. So he's, still at it.
And do you live in Boston?
A suburb of Boston, yeah, North Shore.
North Shore, okay. I studied in Boston for 1 year, attended Harvard. I was a resident at the Mass General at the outpatient department. I'm sure you have visited.
Sure have.
So let's have a look at some of the work that you have done, which is just, in my estimation, absolutely incredible. In a recent paper, which I had the pleasure of reading, which is called Engineering Novel Bodies and Novel Binds, you wrote, teleonomy is a linchpin concept that helps address key open questions around evolvability, biological plasticity, and basal cognition. So can you please tell us what is meant by teleonomy?
Yeah, teleonomy and its close cousin teleology, and we can dig into what the distinction there is.
Yes.
Both of them refer to the idea that for certain kinds of systems, a good way to think about them is in terms of goal directedness. So we can think about these systems in a way that emphasizes that they are competent to pursue some sort of goal in some well-defined space. They have some degree of competency to pursue that goal, maybe very humble, maybe very significant. And I think that understanding this fact about living systems and especially the fact that living systems have multi-scale competency, meaning that the molecular networks, the cells, the tissues, the organs, the organism, of course, and or groups of organisms all have goals that they are pursuing in their own spaces, and all of this is happening simultaneously. And my claim is that coming to grips with that fact, which a lot of people do not want to do, but coming to grips with that fact sheds some very useful new light on understanding evolution, on developing novel interventions for regenerative medicine, and of course synthetic bioengineering and robotics and things like this. So I think acknowledging and in fact exploiting the goal directedness of life is a critical step in the maturation of the life sciences. And I can give examples, of course, why I think that.
So what would be one of the simplest goals for a simple organism?
So one of my, one of the favorite things that I think about is morphogenesis. So the creation, the modification, and the repair of large-scale anatomical shape. Now, shapes are built of biological shapes are built of cells, and so one of the things that we think about in our lab is how collections of cells are a kind of a collective intelligence that solves problems in an interesting space, that being morphospace, the space of all possible configurations. And of course, the cells themselves have local goals that are metabolic goals. For example, they like to keep certain energy molecules within a particular range, and they like to keep pH and other physiological parameters in a certain range. These are sort of very small scale kind of goals of single cells. But when they get together in a very particular way, they have access to a larger space with completely different goals that individual cells cannot follow. So I'll give you an example. If you tadpoles must become frogs, and the tadpole face with the eyes, the nostrils, and the mouth and everything else, in order to become a frog, it has to rearrange its face. So the mouth has to move, the eyes have to move, everything has to move. And so it was thought at one point that in some fashion, what the genetics of that organism give you is a hardwired machine that basically moves, every organ moves in the right direction, the right distance. And that way you can always reliably get from the correct tadpole to a correct frog. Okay, so that would be a hypothesis of basically extremely low or perhaps zero competency on the part of the cells. They do exactly the same thing every single time. So a few years ago, we decided to test that hypothesis, and in particular, I thought that because there are many other examples of this, I thought that let's find out if this process has actually a little more intelligence. And when I say intelligence, I mean in William James's sense, which is he defined intelligence as the ability to reach the same end by different means. That's how he put it. And so this idea that there's goal-directed activity and you have some degree of competency to get there in different ways, despite various things that might try to perturb you along the way. So what we did was we created what we call Picasso tadpoles. Basically, everything is scrambled. The eyes are on the side of the head, the jaws are up here, everything is kind of moved around. And we can talk about how we did that. So when you do that, what you find out is that actually they still make quite normal frogs. And the way that happens is that all of these different compartments of tissue move because they start in the wrong position. If they were hardwired, they would move the right distance. They would end up a mess. Right? If you start in the wrong position and you're a simple machine that always does the same thing, you will end up in the wrong position. Instead, what they do is they all move around relative to each other. Sometimes they go too far and actually have to come back, but they all move around until they reach a correct frog face, and then they stop. Okay, so now this tells you, this gives you a very simple example. There's a morphospace, a space of possible configurations of the head. Most of that space is wrong. It's not what the frog is trying, what the frog tissues are trying to achieve. But there's an ensemble within some error, range. There's an ensemble of states that are correct. That's where it wants to go. So what normally it does is it navigates from the tadpole sort of distribution to the frog distribution. And if you start it somewhere else, it will still reach the right goal. So what you can say is that basically, and Chris Fields and I developed this at length in a recent paper, where all of this different kinds of intelligent activity can be studied as navigation policies in some problem space. And all of these navigation policies can be very simple. In other words, just go in the direction you know, and that's it. Right? They can be slightly more complex, like bacteria, which is as long as life is getting better, keep going. And if it's not getting better, then randomly tumble and try again. Or they can be something much more complex, such as goal-directed movement towards a particular region. Or in the case of humans, very complex with planning and forethought and metacognition and all that. So, so this is what I mean. A group of cells often will have a particular region in anatomical morphospace that it tries to get to, and it will have certain competencies, usually amazing and surprising competencies, of doing that despite various nasty things that we might do to try to push it out of its normal course of action.
Okay, I just need a little bit of time to digest all that, because it's very new information, isn't it? So in this paper that I just loved and studied closely, you say the whole of regenerative medicine hangs on the question of how to induce collectives of cells, which is what we have been talking about now, right? To build one structure rather than another. Birth defects, traumatic injury, cancer, and degenerative disease would all be solved if we had a mature science of making predictions and deriving rational interventions into the morphogenetic processes. So could you just expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah. One of the bigger picture here, and then I'll drill down to the regenerative
Sure.
medicine side of it. The bigger picture is this. We, in general, do not have a very good set of frameworks for understanding collective intelligences. When you assemble a collective intelligence, and we do this all the time, we make swarm robotics and the Internet of Things and various social financial structures. We do this all the time. We really have a very poor ability to predict what is going to be the level of sophistication of that new agent that's going to emerge from this, the new mind, and if it has some reasonable degree of sophistication, what are the goals that this thing is going to try to pursue? We are the only arena in which we really have done any work on this as a society is in neuroscience and cognition. So we have a little bit of experience saying, okay, under specific circumstances, a collection of neurons is going to make this kind of brain. And basically just by studying, not that we can predict really much, but just by studying other examples in the biosphere, we can say that if you have a brain that looks like a fish brain, this is the set of things you can do. And if you're a primate, there's some other things you can do and so on. So okay, but all of our tools are really very tied to those specific examples. And we are just not very good at being able to recognize collective intelligences, understand what they're capable of, what they're going to want to do, and then of course to manipulate them. And to me, this is kind of an existential question for humanity, because we are surrounded by these things, and we're going to be making many more, clearly. So the question, we have to get ourselves in a better place to understand how they're going to work. What does exist is what people call complexity science, or the science of complexity. And this looks at this idea that if you have a large amount of subunits interacting according to rules, sometimes very complex things happen. And so there are certainly lots of people doing very nice work on dynamical systems theory and complexity theory and so on, trying to predict what normally happens as these systems roll themselves forward. But it's generally done in a very sort of mechanical, with a very mechanical approach. And the aspects of that collective that might be formed that are able to pursue goals in different ways, and thus a little bit of creativity, novelty, robustness, all these kinds of things, we still have no real understanding of that. So that's the general thing. Why it matters for regenerative medicine is this. Let's say let's take sort of broadly conceived, the goal of regenerative medicine is to be able to replace or repair any part of your body, right? And then there's also, of course, bioengineering, which says, well, let's also make some things that don't yet exist. That would be useful too. But let's say just, we're just going to be able to repair and replace every part of your body. One thing you could do, and this is what basically molecular medicine does today, is to say, well, because we only believe in bottom-up control and bottom-up causation, our only hope is to figure out which micro states, and so we're talking about DNA changes like CRISPR, right? So genome editing, molecular changes to networks. So down at the molecular biochemistry level, we can make changes there and hope we can fix the system level problem, regenerate an organ, or something that isn't just suppressing some symptoms, but actually fix something for once, right? So the problem there, of course, is that because the molecular signals are generally indicating cell properties, but whereas what we care about are system level organ properties, like the fact that you have a certain number of fingers, which are a certain size and located in a certain place and so on. That gulf is so large and involves so many sort of recursive steps. It's so convoluted and nonlinear that solving that inverse problem. I want to, here I have a salamander and it's got bilateral symmetry. I would like it to have threefold symmetry. Fine. What changes do I need to make to the DNA to make that happen? We don't have any way of inverting that normal process, right? It's just going to be, I think it's going to be intractable fundamentally. So what's left to us is to try to understand what capacities exist in the organism that allow us to interface with higher order modules, so that we're not micromanaging it, but we are taking advantage of whatever competencies the tissues have in morphospace. To give you a very simple example, think about what it was like to program a computer in the 40s and 50s, literally. And I have this picture that I show in all my talks. She's sitting there and she's pulling wires in and out, right? That's what you had to do. You had to interact with the hardware. So nowadays, if you tell your students that, hey, we're going to switch from Photoshop to Microsoft Excel, and you get out your soldering iron and start rewiring your computer, they all laugh, right? Because we know that what has happened in information sciences is we've realized that, okay, if your hardware is good enough, you don't need to rewire it every time. You can take advantage of its computational competencies. So fortunately, and this is because of evolution, biological hardware is definitely good enough. So that means that instead of having to rewire and solve this inverse problem, we can do some very interesting things at higher levels, communicating not with the molecular networks, but with the cells and tissues, and push them towards actions that we really don't know how to micromanage, and we don't want to micromanage. And another analogy to this, if you will, is people trained animals thousands of years before we knew any neuroscience at all. Why could you train a dog or a horse knowing nothing about what's between their ears? You didn't know anything about that, but you can still train them, because once you recognize that system has a certain sophistication on this cognitive continuum, that it is capable of learning of certain kinds, and then you find out what are the rewards and punishments and the currency and what kind of learning it can do. So you find out these things, then you can achieve outcomes that you don't have to play every neuron like a puppet to get your dog to do this and that. It doesn't matter. You push all that complexity off onto the system itself, right? You communicate at a completely different, much easier level. Why? Because it provides an interface. It provides a convenient interface for reprogramming, and biology at most levels does this. And so that's what I'm claiming, that to really get regenerative medicine in any kind of a reasonable time frame, we have to take advantage of these interfaces that evolution has so kindly provided for us.
So, okay, so taking that then a step further in terms of your interest and your research, you say beyond life on Earth, how would we recognize novel forms of life? What is the appropriate scale of observation for detecting the behavior and appropriate problem spaces in which life operates? So it seems to me that you're moving towards a whole new definition of life in your work.
To be honest, I spend very little time thinking about the definition of life per se, and there are other people who do, and it's a fine thing. But I don't focus on life per se. I focus on cognition. Okay. So I'm very interested, and it's a whole other question of if we sort of make a Venn diagram of all the things that are on the cognitive spectrum and all the things that are alive, how do those two sets interact, right? I tend to think that cognition is the more important category, because I think there are many things that are probably not alive that nevertheless have cognition, and vice versa. So we can talk about how that plays out. But I'm less committed to any definition of life. But I really do spend a lot of time thinking about definition of a cognitive continuum, and I think that it's very important to think outside of. Look, here on Earth, we basically have an N of 1 example. We have one phylogenetic tree that took place here on Earth. And when we look at these naturally evolved things with all their frozen accidents and everything else, deriving theories about biology from this one example is like testing your theory on the same data that generated it, right? It's really limiting. And we actually, it constrains a lot. but to only look. So for that perspective, I like synthetic morphology. I like this effort. I mean, we don't have any aliens to work with now, but we can make some things, and we can talk about those things. We can make some things that are incredibly different than all of the things that exist that are naturally evolved. And I also think it's really important to not get caught up in one particular privileged scale of observation, because at the wrong scale, you can always pick a wrong scale that makes you miss all the important stuff. So just to give a simple example, if you were to shrink yourself down to the level of an individual cell and look at an embryo developing, if you didn't already know what embryogenesis was, would you ever be able to guess that this process is, despite all the noise, some cells are dying every single time, it happens a little bit differently, right? The cells are going here, there, there's noise everywhere. Would you ever guess that this is a robust process that ends up the same way every single time? I think you would not.
No.
And would you ever, right? And would you ever guess what the actual outcome is going to be? And I think you could not. And so going at the wrong scale, now that same kind of thing, again, if somebody wants to, if you had, let's say you had a computer and you sort of zoom in all the way down to the electrons, you would say, well, this is fine. I see electrons obeying the laws of, Maxwell's equations, and that's it. And you would not see anything called an algorithm. You would never program anything. You would have no idea that any of these higher levels of organization exist. So we have to pick the right level. So for example, in evolution, again, one might wonder is what given how long it takes generally and the large scales involved, are we seeing it correctly? Maybe if we step back, we could say, okay, this is obviously very speculative. I don't know. I'm just putting out the idea that we need the right scale for things. You might be able to see a whole lineage of organisms, millions of years of alligators or something, I don't know, something like this, as one agent exploring where basically every actual organism is a hypothesis of that agent about the environment, and it gets either strengthened or weakened in a kind of active inference sort of sense. So you might actually see a whole lineage, not one animal, but you might see a whole lineage as a particular kind of problem solving system. And you wouldn't do that if you didn't scale up to to that level. So that's what I was getting at, is just that we have to be open to the fact that the most interesting aspects might come at a level that we're not expecting.
So you said more interested in cognition, into the question of cognition, rather than life. What is life? What is not life? What about the question of the mind? Does cognition imply a mind? Does mind imply a cognition? What is your take on the question of the mind?
Yeah, I for all of these things, I think that my take on all of these things is that we use these words in two ways, right? We use them in our everyday sense, and that's fine. But we have to keep in mind that in order to keep life going and society and sort of practicalities, we use words all the time that don't actually mean anything. For example, we have this concept of an adult, right? And so on your 18th birthday, boom, you're an adult. Now, what special thing actually happens on your 18th birthday? Nothing. And so, right, so this is a crisp category that we've come up with so that we can deal with courts and things like this, but it doesn't mean anything.
No.
So when I use a lot of these terms, I'm trying to come up with I realize they're going to be used differently in everyday speech, but what I think we owe as scientists, we owe a defensible, sort of rigorous vocabulary for all of these things. And one thing that vocabulary has to do is it has to facilitate progress. In other words, some people have very fundamental sort of axiomatic beliefs, and from there, if your theory doesn't suggest something different, then it's out. So people will say to me things like, if thermostats don't have goals, period. So if your theory is trying to tell me that thermostats have even the tiniest of goals, I'm out. That's it. I just will not believe that thermostats have goals. But my approach to this is a little different. I don't think we can have armchair beliefs about these things. I don't think we can have feelings about these things. I think we need to make empirically testable frameworks that and then they either facilitate research or they don't. So in all the terms I use and all the sort of frameworks, my TAME framework and all that is all focused on this thing, that it has to help you in some way to do the next experiment. It has to make predictions. It has to help you get to new capabilities. So for the question of the mind, I mean, basically how I see things is that agency claims, meaning that some claim about, so here's a system. It might be evolved, it might be designed, it might be a mix of the two, it might be an alien, it might be a synthetic biology construct, who knows what it might be, a software AI, who knows what it is. So somebody gives you the system, and we start arguing about what level of agency does it have. Okay, and so somebody says, so now you've got views like somebody will say, well, it wasn't evolved naturally, therefore it does not have a mind, it's just faking. That's a pretty popular view nowadays. So for some reason, lots of people think that natural evolution has a monopoly on producing minds. And so if we engineer something rationally, even if we use evolutionary algorithms in doing it, people will say that's not real, it's faking. It may be a good fake, but it's faking. Okay, so that's one idea. But whatever it is, I take all agency claims as engineering protocols, meaning that when you tell me that this thing has a certain level of cognition, you are telling me how competent it is, what is the scale of its cognitive light cone in the sense of how big are the goals it's able to pursue, and with what competency. And based on that, what that basically does is define a set of engineering tools that we can bring to bear to relate to that system. So maybe what you're telling me is that this thing is like a mechanical clock. So if you wanted to do something different, you're going to have to rewire the hardware. That's it. You're never going to convince it of anything. You're never going to reward and punish it. All you can do is rewire it. Or maybe you tell me that, well, this system is a
excuse me. Yes.
Maybe you're telling me that this system is a homeostatic system, like a thermostat. Okay, so now what do I know now? Well, now I know that I don't need to understand every part of it, but I do. But if I learn to read and write the set point, then I can cause it to do certain things. And in fact, then I can walk away and it will continue to keep things in parameter, even without micromanagement. So as an engineer, I can do something to it that I could not do to the mechanical clock. I can change the set point without rewiring the whole thing. Or you might tell me that this thing is even more complex. You could actually do behavior shaping with rewards and punishments. Now that's great, because then I don't even need to know how the set point is encoded. I mean, I might want to know, but I don't need to know in order to control that system. Or you might tell me that the system has linguistic capacity and metacognition, like you and I do, and then I might find out that I don't even have to give rewards and punishments. I need to specify cogent reasons for it to do things, and then it might do things. And by the way, then we could be friends and have other kinds of relationships that you couldn't have with other things on that continuum. So to me, all of these agency claims are testable, fallible claims about protocols that are good ways to relate to that system. Okay, and those are testable, meaning that you tell me what you think that is, we try it, and we are going to find out, does it work or doesn't it? And if somebody else has a different claim, we will see who's got the better way of predicting, controlling, creating, and otherwise having a relationship with this kind of system. So that to me, all of this thing is a kind of testable continuum. And so if we say something has a mind, what I really want to know is, yeah, but what kind, and what kind of competencies does it have, and what kind of goals does it have? And then we can really get down to what, so that's why I really don't like binary categories for any of this stuff. If somebody says that can't be, cognitive, or that doesn't have a mind, the binary doesn't do anything for me. I want to know specifically, are you saying it's zero, like a crystal that's just never going to change? Or are you saying it's small, like a rock rolling down the hill? Or are you saying it's intermediate, like a fish, or or something else? Or are you saying it's very high? Right? Let's be specific. Let's say, what do we think this thing can and can't do, and then we can find out if that's true or not.
Okay, so that brings us into ethics, I suppose.
Yeah.
And you write, crucially, this new field suggests not only novel capabilities and advances in knowledge, but also the need for a new ethics.
Yeah.
The frequently voiced statements that living things are not machines reflect an outdated essentialism and a type of magical thinking that trusts in clear binary lines separating evolved living beings from designed machines.
Yeah.
So when we get into many of the sort of chimeras that you have created, is that a good term to describe it? You know, the combinations of robotics and artificial intelligence and computer chips and living things. Um, how do you feel about the ethics of those life forms?
Yeah. So here's what I think is going on. A long time ago, it was there was an easy way to make those distinctions as far as, I mean, what do we really want to know? For any given system, we want to know, what do I owe that system, meaning what kind of responsibilities do I have towards it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you want to know what kinds of responsibilities can we expect that system to carry out? Can we expect it to, what can we expect it to be responsible for? And in the olden days, it was kind of easy to know. What you would do is you could come up to it and sort of knock on it, right? And if you heard a metallic clangy sound, you could immediately conclude several things. It was made in a factory. It's going to be pretty boring. It's going to have a low level of cognition. It's not going to do too much. And therefore I can take it apart. I can do whatever I want. I have no responsibilities to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you sort of touch it and you get this like warm, sort of furry thud. You would say, ah, this is a naturally evolved system. If I do certain things, I'll go to jail. Maybe I can eat it, and in some societies that's fine, and in some it's not. But we all know we owe some level of respect and compassion. So that was pretty easy, but the thing is that it wasn't easy because these crisp categories are real. It was easy because we didn't have the technology or the imagination to understand how bad those categories actually are. The reality, and in fact, so let's see, you can think of it this way: what's happened since pre-scientific days. In the pre-scientific days, where we had this Garden of Eden view, you had a very crisp category. You had humans, you had Adam and Eve over here. They were one category. And he had everything else, right? So it was maybe the angels too. So right, so you had humans and angels over here, and he had everything else over here. So rocks, machines, animals, everybody else was over here. So you had
Right.
a nice binary category.
Yes.
It was easy to know what to do.
Yes.
Then Darwin comes along and he says, well, binary doesn't work because there are a series of intermediate forms. You see, we are related along a continuum. So he gave us one axis of a continuum. Now, in Prince, and so of course everybody freaked out, and that people are still freaked out about it, and that's one axis, and it's going to get a lot worse than that. I should say that even before that, anybody who has ever thought about embryonic development or watched a frog egg become a frog or thought about a human egg become a human, you can already see, knowing nothing else about evolution, you can already see that we have a real problem, because we all take this journey from physics to mind, right? All of us do. We start life as a blob of quiescent chemicals in an oocyte. And then slowly, very slowly but surely, 9 months and some years later, we become a fully cognitive modern human, let's say, right? And so now you can simply walk backwards from that and ask, okay, so when did I stop being a human? Of course, some people will, right, again, for practical purposes, they'll pick, it's this month or it's this, day X, that's when. But that's like being an adult. That means nothing. Biology doesn't give you any kind of a sharp line for this at all. So already you see that there's a smooth continuum, right? But so Darwin sort of underscored that in the evolutionary sense. What I'm saying is it's really much worse than that, because if you think about it, people will say, the human mind or the human, body, whatever. Just put that human in the center and think, okay, there's a whole sort of evolutionary track going all the way back through very slow stages, generation to generation, to various primate, hominids and primates, and all the way back to bacteria and archaea, right? So there's a smooth continuum there. There's a smooth developmental continuum where you can just sort of track it all the way back to an oocyte. Then there's the range of all of the modifications that we can and are making. So there are humans with various new organs. We are going to have implants and chips that modify our cognition by doing interesting things to our neurotransmitters and so on. At some point, some of us are now running wheelchairs with our mind and control with our minds and controlling different devices with our minds and things like that. And then there's, of course, the biological modifications. So if we end up needing to live under the sea or go to some other planet or whatever, maybe somebody wants an extra set of hands or some tentacles or something, you'll have that too. So there's no sense in which there's a sharp essential category of human, and then there's a bunch of other stuff. No, it's continuum all the way in every direction. So because biology is so incredibly interoperable, right? You can make, you can put cells on weird materials and you put them in different circumstances. They always do something sensible. Every combination of evolved material, designed materials, so smart materials, nanomaterials, cells, tissues, and every combination, and software, those three things. And I have a beautiful graphic drawn for me by Jeremy Gay that shows these like three streams coming together to form. And I think it's in that paper. There might be a figure.
Yes, it is.
Right. They make this incredible, massive, this astronomically large space of possible beings, of possible bodies with different minds, some of which are going to be very different from ours. And everything we know about existing agents, human or otherwise, is like a tiny little sort of, tiny little area on that space. But all these other possible things, and then of course some of them might be real out in the universe, others we will make, others are just sort of potential. So before you could drive your ethics with a simple binary choice. Then after Darwin, you could sort of kind of drive your ethics with a single axis, although we weren't very good at that anyway. And now we're finding out that, yeah, there's not just one axis, there's an incredibly large space of possible beings. And so any ethics that we form as the society matures is going to have to grapple with these facts. We are going to have to be able to relate to beings that don't look anything like us in terms of their composition, and they don't share an origin story with us in terms of coming down the natural tree of life. And that should be okay, in order to treat another being ethically and have compassion and all that. I don't need them to have gotten here in the same way that I got here. I don't need them to look like me or be made like me. I think we need to get over that, all of that, and we need to develop. Not that I'm not claiming I have an ethical system all worked out for this, but I'm just saying that the traditional criteria for that sort of thing are not going to survive the decade, and we need to get past that.
Well, in your last sentence, in the summary of that amazing paper that you were kind enough to share with me, you say it is not clear what a new ethics of life as it can be will look like, but some sort of golden rule about compassion towards systems proportional to their teleonomic capacity might be a place from which to start. Is that a good summary of your ideas?
Yeah, I mean, again, I certainly don't pretend to be, it's beyond my pay grade to develop a proper system of ethics. Okay, so I'm not going to be the one to develop that. However, just as an example of ways in which I think the standard story can be expanded is basically that. If we think about, well, so if you can't base your rules on what something looks like and where it came from, what are you going to base it on? And I think in general, I think it's pretty reasonable to say something like, to say that rule in a simpler way, you might say, be nice to goal-driven systems. That might be a rule, meaning that to the extent to which something has a large cognitive light cone, the ability to pursue large complex goals, that probably tells you something about the kind of relationship you should have with it with respect to ethics and compassion and all of that kind of thing. So that seems right. You don't need to be worried about bowling balls rolling down hills much, but something that whether it's alien or created, that is really striving, right, is having a some sort of an existence where it actually tries to accomplish certain things, that's probably the kind of system that you need to think about hard before you take it apart or do other things with it. And this is all very amateur stuff on my part. I mean, science fiction writers have been at this for well over 100 years. They pointed this out a long time ago, that if something lands on your front lawn and this kind of sort of weird metallic looking thing on wheels rolls out and hands you a poem, you've got some thinking to do, because it doesn't look like any of the things you're used to treating with certain degree of respect. But can we really assume that a human shaped frontal cortex is our criterion for how we're going to relate to cognitive beings, right? That seems incredibly kind of parochial to me. So I think that's what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get at this question of, what do all cognitive agents have in common? And I think it's the ability to pursue goals of some radius. And I think that it's that has to be the driver of how we relate to each other.
So in terms of, you have a wonderful diagram right at the beginning of your paper about different chimeras in history, going back to Babylonian times and Egyptian times and things like that. And you talk about these different gods, which were like half animal and half man. Do you think that in the past there were perhaps some cultures that actually developed some of these chimeras that we are just about to develop ourselves?
Certainly in the case of plants, people have been crossbreeding plants a long time. People made mules, and I think these kinds of things, what I think these chimeric creatures help to stir up is this idea that we need to. This goes back to the first question we talked about, which is the predictive. Do we have a predictive science that can tell us what a chimeric individual is going to be like? So for a simple example, my guess is, of course, that the mule was an accidental discovery. I don't think anybody could have looked at a horse and a donkey and knew exactly what the combination. In fact, we still can't do it. This is something that I bring up to my students, is that, look, axolotls or salamanders, baby axolotls have legs. Tadpoles don't have legs. So now we could go and we could make a chimeric frogolotl, which is 50% frog cells, 50% axolotl cells. And the important thing is that we've got the genomes. We've got we've sequenced the frog genome. We've sequenced the axolotl genome. Now I ask a simple question: will frogolotls have legs? We don't have any. We have no ability to answer this question, even though we understand the molecular biology and the cell biology quite well. We don't have any way to answer this question, because we are still really far from understanding the decision making of the collective intelligence of cells, and in particular, what happens when we swap out half of the components with something else. This is only a mature science of these things is going to be able to answer questions like this. So I think they were already. I think whoever it is that in the olden days that thought hard about this stuff and came up with these kind of ideas were already thinking about what are essential categories and what happens when you mix them, and how do we know what's going to happen when you do these kinds of things. My guess is, I don't know, but my guess is that the sort of more philosophically inclined ancient folks were already thinking of that. That I think is the origin of these kind of chimeric ideas.
So on a more personal level, in the few minutes that we have left, can I ask you, was there anything in your own background that you think contributed to your interest in this subject?
I mean, it's hard to say, because there's never a control experiment, right? And you never know what would happen if you did something different. But I can say, my earliest, I've been interested in this stuff since I was very, very young. My earliest kind of interest in all of this one was, and this was really kind of made strong by the my father used to take the back off of our TV set. Right. I would have I used to have asthma when I was a kid. I had asthma attacks, and so we didn't have any, medication, of course. So to just distract the kid, he would take we had this ancient television set. He would take the back off of it, and you could see all the components. And I would sit there and look at these components, and my God, somebody knew how to put these things in exactly the right order to make the cartoons come out the front, right? Like somebody knew how to do this. So that's amazing. So that tells you right there that so that aspect of it. So I always played around with electronics and these kinds of things. That aspect of engineering I was always very, very interested in. The flip side was I would go outside and there was this other kid slightly older that I used to hang out with. He was really into bugs and insects of various kinds. And so he would show me, we would look at caterpillars and beetles and all these different things. And so that immediately raises the question, okay, who put these together? And how come they seem to be, I mean, the TV is kind of cool, but it always does the same thing, more or less.
Right.
These things have a repertoire of different actions. And where did they come from? When we would look at eggs, we would look at butterfly eggs that would hatch these caterpillars and so on. And so you would start, wow, they seem to put themselves together. There's probably no butterfly factory, right? They kind of put themselves together. And then, but they also seem to have preferences because, you can put things in their path and they'll crawl around, or you scare them and they take off or whatever. So I don't know, but just bouncing back between those two things, I think that kind of set me on this, thinking about these sorts of questions.
What was the best advice you ever received?
The best advice I ever received. That's a good question. I think that the best advice routinely was in the form of encouragement to not be afraid to be divergent. In other words, there are many, many voices that will tell you at all points, that's never going to work. Don't do this. That's not how it's done. Look at how everybody else is doing it. And occasionally you get people that will support your journey to do something different, right? And so I was very fortunate to have a few people in my life that would tell me that while other people, including very smart, successful people, might be really well calibrated on their own ideas and what works for them, they're not necessarily well calibrated. In fact, most of them are not well calibrated for you and your life and your goals and things like that. And so that to me, just that level of encouragement and a reminder that people may give you specific criticism on specific things, and that's gold because that lets you refine your craft, But the kind of meta advice where they say, don't think of it this way, or don't go into this area, or don't do that stuff. You don't take that, you can't take that too seriously because nobody knows, right? Nobody really knows. Everybody knows their path and how they did it and how that worked out for them. They don't know what's going to work out for you. So that is what I found the most useful because sometimes it's hard to do things that are just different from what's already what's obviously being rewarded.
Speaking of rewards, what lies ahead of you? You're only what, 59, 60 years old?
I am 53.
53. My goodness. So you're 53 years old. You have still many, many years to live. What sort of goals do you see ahead of you? What is it that you're striving to achieve?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how long any of us live. I kind of feel like time is very short. Time always kind of goes fast for me. I would like to do two fundamental things. The big picture, I would like to do two things. I would like to push some of the things that we're doing to the point where it's helping actual patients, so regenerative medicine. So we have a couple of spin-off companies. We are trying to push some of the stuff that we're doing into areas of cancer. So clinical approaches to cancer, to organ regeneration, birth defects, things like that. So on the one hand, I would really like to see some of this actually be helping real people now. I have no doubt that it will in the future, for sure, but I would like to see it like today. I get every several times a week, I get these heartbreaking phone calls from people who have just all kinds of unbelievable physical problems and limitations and whatnot, and they're all asking for solutions. They say, okay, so you've been at this for a while. Like, where's the when do I get my hand back? When do I, right, my spinal cord and all that? So I would like to see some of that actually, become real. And really, I think I would like to, with the body of work, maybe I'll write it as a book at some point, to make a change in how people think about the important questions of biology, specifically from an agency point of view. To really show that it's a practical, it's not philosophical, it's a practical benefit that you get to start thinking about the agential aspects of biology at all levels. And I would like to I would like to make a shift as much as I can in that direction.
Very interesting. So I asked all my guests one final question. So here it comes. What does being human mean to you?
That is a great question. I think that human does not refer to any particular genetic, constellation of genetics. I think it doesn't have anything to do with anatomical states. I don't think it has anything to do with any of that. I think human is a moral category. I think someone, whatever, however they got here, whatever they're made of, is human level if they have a certain range, basically roughly that of a typical, standard human, of the ability to have moral concern and compassion. And what I mean by that is, we all have a certain sort of linear range of things that we are able to care about, more than most animals, less than one could imagine, right? One could imagine an evolved being that's created at some point or engineered or exists somewhere in the world, in the universe, that is literally capable of caring in the linear range about every living thing on Earth, right? That's completely beyond us physically. We can say it, but we can't actually care like linearly about,
Right.
that many beings. But of course, the various, at least some of the religious traditions talk about possible evolution to that point, right? That you could get to the point where you actually have the capacity to literally be compassionate, feel compassion for every being. So somewhere within that band, from simpler creatures that can't muster even what we can, and whatever lies ahead, but somewhere in that band is roughly a human level of ability to be responsible for your actions towards a kind of ethical level. And that I think is what we mean when we say human.
So to be human is to care.
To be human is to have a minimal level of ability to care, and to exert compassion towards other beings.
Thank you. That's lovely. That's just great. Well, we'll have to stop there, Mike. Thank you so much for participating in this. I just want to say to our listeners that when you listen to this podcast, if you like it, please check the subscribe button. Next week, my guest will be Dr. Bruce Lipton, cell biologist and lecturer, who is an internationally recognized leader in bridging science and spirit. Bruce was on the faculty of the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and later performed groundbreaking stem cell research at Stanford Medical School. His pioneering research on cloned human stem cells presaged today's revolutionary new field of epigenetics. He's the best-selling author of The Biology of Belief and the Honeymoon Effect, and co-author of Spontaneous Evolution. Please tune in. And thanks again, Dr. Michael Levin, for a wonderful, most stimulating conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.